In the previous year, we spoke about Makas Bechoros. And we mentioned that even though Makas Bechoros is, on paper, the 10th of a series of 10 Makas, but at the same time it's clear that Makas Bechoros was more than just a Makkah. The purpose of the Makkos was to punish Paroi, his Avodim, and really all the Egyptians for the fact that they unlawfully enslaved the Jews. HaKadosh Baruch Hu already told Avram Avinu by the bris bein Absarim, Yodoya teida ki ger yir zarach be'eretz lo lahem v'avadim v'inu oisam arba mei shana. However, v'games hagoya sheyavodu don anoichi. And Rashi says don anoichi be'eser makas. So the purpose of the 10 makas was to punish the Mitzrim for the fact that they tortured the Yidden all those years that they were in Mitzrayim. Stating that, we mentioned, it's mavur that Makas Bechoros was more than just a vehicle and another patch on the Mitzrim. As a matter of fact, it's mavur that Makas Bechoros was aschalta de Geula. Makas Bechoros was already the beginning of Gulas Mitzrayim. We mentioned that in davening, whenever we talk about Yetzias Mitzrayim, we seem to always give a special shout out to Makas Bechoros. Birchas Kriya Shema in the morning by Ezras. Kol b'chayreim harakta uvecharcha Yisrael ga'alta v'yamsuf bakata, etc., etc. Birchas Kriya Shema at night in V'amuna Kol Zois. Hamake be'evrasei kol b'chayreim Mitzrayim v'yoytzei Yisam Yisrael mitoicham l'cheiros olam. In Shabbos Psukei de Zimra, when we go through all the Hoidul Hashem ki toivs ki lo'ilam chazdois, l'makei Mitzrayim b'vcheireim ki lo'ilam chazdoi, v'yoytzei Yisrael mitoichem ki lo'ilam chazdoi. In all of these aforementioned parashas, there's no mention of the other Makas. The only Makkah that we mention is Makas Bechoros. And the oimik is not just because that was the Makkah b'patish, literally. It's not just because it was the last Makkah. It's because Makas Bechoros is not just a punishment for the Mitzrim. It's not just a little bit of sweet revenge. It's actually part and parcel of Geulas Mitzrayim, because when Makas Bechoros happened, at that point there was an aschalta de Geula, and our redemption began. We said that perhaps that's the reason why, although for the first 9 Makas, the Yidden didn't need any schusim, they didn't need any oises, they didn't need to do any pu'ula for the Makkah not to affect them. But when it came to Makas Bechoros, it sounds like all of a sudden there was a din v'cheshben. All of a sudden there's a halalu v'halalu, and therefore the Yidden had to be in a situation where they were roy, and they were deserving not to be included in the Makkah, which at first glance is a pella, because if the whole purpose of the Makkah was to punish the Egyptian for enslaving the Jews were the victims, what would have been the Havamina that maybe they should be punished? But if Makas Bechoros is this man of the Geula, now the Yidden need a schus, not so much so they shouldn't get punished with the Gamas HaGoya She'avodu Don Anoichi. They need a schus because right now it's game time, and right now there's a big decision that's going to be made. Sifrei Chaim v'Sifrei Mesim Mapsuchim. Do the Yidden deserve to be saved, or do they not deserve to be saved? And therefore, this second, the Yidden needed an ois and a siman and a mitzvah and a schos, and they had to distance themselves from the avodah of the Egyptians in order for them to be able to make it out alive. We said that Reb Shmuel Yankiv said that we say in the Haggadah, "V'yotzienu Hashem miMitzrayim, ani v'lo malach, ani v'lo shlich." And what's the raya? Because v'avarti beretz Mitzrayim, b'alayla hazeh, ani v'lo malach, ani v'lo shlich. From the fact that Makas Bechoros was ani v'lo malach, that's a raya that Yetzias Mitzrayim was ani v'lo malach. Frek Reb Shmuel Yankiv, what sheiches? What is the two have to do with each other? I mean, I know they're inyan, but they're not the same thing. Makas Bechoros was the hakah; it was a punishment for the Egyptians. Yetzias Mitzrayim is a whole other inyan. That's v'achriken yetzu, right? That took place afterwards. The two are not related. The teretz is because Yetzias Mitzrayim started by Makas Bechoros, and if Makas Bechoros happened on Niveloi Malach, on Niveloi Shliach, so that's a revelation, that's a gilui that the whole Yetzias Mitzrayim took place on Niveloi Malach, on Niveloi Shliach. The truth is, we just read now the end of Parshas Bay. We went through the psukim together. It's so obvious that Makas Bechoros is different, right? We have the Parsha of Kadishli, which introduces the idea of Kedushas Bechar, which segues into the Parsha of V'hoyeki V'yacha, which is very much the Parsha of Kedushas Bechar. And what do you see in the Parsha of V'hoyeki V'yacha? You see that we make a zecher for the inyan of Makas Bechiris, right? Is related to the Inyan of Bechor. V'marta Elov B'choislik Yodoi Tzionu Hashem in Mitzrayim b'Beis Avodim V'hi ki Ikshapar L'Shalchenu V'yarig Hashem Kol Bechor B'Eretz Mitzrayim Mi Bechor Adam Ad Bechor Behema Al Kein Ani Zoyveach V'chulu V'hoylo Yisrael Yodchol T'Tavis Ben Einech is talking about the parish of Bechor. So you see clearly that the Inyan of Makas Bechiris is so critical that we mamish make zeichers. You want to know why we're mentioning it in Berchas Kriyishma? There's a whole parish in the Torah of you have to make zeichers for it. The whole Masechtas Bechiris coming up in Daf Yomi is related to what? It's related to this Inyan of Kedushas Bechor. So that means Makas Bechiris, which led to Kedushas Bechor, is something that is part and parcel of the conscience of the Yid. Now, if all it is a punishment for the Egyptians, then why are we making such a big deal about it? You make a zeicher about Dam Tzefardei, Kinamarav, etc., etc. No, but Makas Bechiris we do. The teretz is because how many zeichers do we make for Yetzias Mitzrayim? Our whole Yahadus is rooted in Zeicher L'Yetzias Mitzrayim, right? Think about how many times you say those words, Zeicher with the Niggin, L'Yetzias Mitzrayim. A Yid lives Zeicher L'Yetzias Mitzrayim. Makas Bechiris is the Aschal to the Geula. It's the beginning of the Inyan of Yetzias Mitzrayim. And as a result, it's for that reason we make all these Zeichers, we make all these remembrances for the Inyan of Makas Bechiris. How do we do it? We do it through the parsha of Kedushas Bechor. In other words, this was a little bit of a long-winded sikkum of what we spoke about in the previous year. Makas Bechiris was really when Geulas Mitzrayim began. Truth is, it's a Mefurish Gemara. It's a Gemara. We would commit malpractice if we didn't mention this Gemara. This Gemara is a Masechtas Brachos on Daf Tesam and Aleph. Literally. It's the second week of the Daf Yomi cycle. You already learned this Gemara. The Gemara brings a machlokes between Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and the Chachamim until when one is allowed to eat the Korban Pesach Balai Lazeh by the Leil HaSeder. Says the Gemara, the Tanya, we learned to the Brayso, it says in Parshas Boy, Va'achlu es habasa balai laza. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Omer, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said, Nemrakan, it says balai laza, v'never lahalon, and it says by Makas Bechiris, also in Parshas Boy, Va'avarti be'eretz Mitzrayim balai laza. Ma lahalon at chatzos, just like Makas Bechiris was at chatzos. As a matter of fact, it was bichatzos, it was literally chatzos. Afkan, so too when it comes to the mitzvah of eating the Korban Pesach, at chatzos. Omri Rabbi Akiva, so Rabbi Akiva told Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, how could you say that? Va'loik farnema, the pasuk says, you're supposed to eat the Korban Pesach by this man of Chipazayin. And the way Rabbi Kiva understood it was Ad Shas Chipazayin. You could eat it up until the time of Chipazayin, up until the time that the Yidden were in a state of chipazon. Now, when was chipazon? When they were free. When were they freed? First, the next day. And if that's the case, you can eat it the entire night. Im kain ma talmud leim balayla. Why did it say balayla? Rabbi Akiva went ahead and Rabbi Akiva gave a drasha. Either way, I'm skipping a little bit. Amar Rabbi Abba said, Hakol moedim. As it relates to this machlokes between Rabbi Elazar and Azariah and the Chachamim, but whether the Korban Pesach could be eaten until Chatzos, or the way you could eat the Korban Pesach the entire night, everybody agrees that as it relates to Gulas Mitzrayim, that Nigalu Yisrael mi Mitzrayim, when the Yidden were oskalized from Mitzrayim, by Nigalu Elu Ba'erev, the Geula happened in the evening. Everyone agrees that the Geula happened in the evening. Shenemar, Hoitziyacha Hashem Elokecha mi Mitzrayim, Loila, it's a pasuk, Dvarim Tezayin Aleph, Ukishayatsu, and everybody agrees that although the Geula happened by Laila, but the Yitziyah happened by day. How do you know that? Shenema mi machras haPesach yatzu b'nei Yisrael b'yad Aman nechlaku. So what was the machlokes? The machlokes was when it says that you eat the Korban Pesach ad chipazayin. So is the shas chipazon the geula which happened by Laila, or is it the yitzir which happened by you? Meaning, even though you have this fundamental machlokes between Rabbi Elazar and Zayin the Chachamim, what the soif zman achilas Korban Pesach is, which by the way translates into what the soif zman achilas afikoymen is, right? Of course, because we eat the afikoymen by the Leila Seder as a zeicha for the Korban Pesach, but that's beyond the scope of what we're doing right now. But even though there's such a machlokes, Bazok Rab Abba don't think that they're arguing in the mitzias of how Yetzias Mitzrayim took place. Everybody agreed there was something significant that happened that night, and there was something significant that happened the next day. The significant thing that happened that night is Kishenigalu Yisrael mi Mitzrayim lo nigalu elo be'erev. And the significant thing that happened during the day is that Ukishayatsu lo yatsu elo be'erev. The shaila is, are we koveya the soif zman achilas Pesach based on the zman of Geula, or we koveya is it based on the soif zman of the Yitzhak. But the Gemara continues and says, Tanya nami hachi one brayso. It says, Hoitziach Hashem alekechem miMitzrayim loylo. V'chi ba'laylo yatzu. Is that true? The Yidden left Mitzrayim at night. V'aloylo yatzu elo b'yoyim. Shenema mimachras haPesach yatzu b'nei Yisrael b'yad Rama. Elo melamed. You know what's coming to teach me? Here's the punchline. Drum roll. Shehischilo lehem geula mi ba'erev. That the aschalta de geula, it started at night. The ultimate Yitzhak didn't happen until the day. So it's a Mefurish Gemara. It's a Mefurish Gemara that Yitzias Mitzrayim happened in two phases. There was the quote-unquote geula, and then there was the quote-unquote Yitzhak. Or in the words of this brayso, it was hischilo ba'erev, and the hashlama didn't happen until the next day. When exactly was this haschala? So if you take a look at Rashi says that what does it mean the haschala of the Gula happened that night? It's because right after Makas Bechoros, Paroi went be'emtza alayla and he started screaming and he started saying, just go, take everything, take everyone. I just don't want to see you again. And the fact that Paroi gave them reshus to leave, that in and of itself was considered already a haschala of a Gula. Now the Yidden didn't leave; they were told you're not allowed to leave your house at night, but being that Pari gave them reshus at that point, so the reshus that Pari gave them, that was the aschala of the geula, and that's what's going on. But the truth is, lefi all the raid that we're talking about right now, that's mavur that Makas Bechoros was already an aschal to the geula, the lashon of the Vilna Gaon that we mentioned in the previous year, and all these marmakoimes that we're discussing right now. There was a real aschala of a geula that happened balayla. And the truth is, if you look at the Vilna Gaon in his Aderes Aliyah, in Parshas Re'eh, he says mefurish, a whole oimik, that al yedei Makas Bechoros, there was a real geula, this raid that we're talking about right now. But the bottom line is, it's mefurish in this Gemara. It's mefurish in the Gemara that there was a geula ba'erev, what is referred to as the aschala of the geula, that happened at night, and then the hashlam is not something that happened until the day. Rashi says, very balabatish, that, Pari gave them reshus at night, and they didn't actually leave until the following morning. But lefi the raid, and it's really mefurish in the Vilna Gaon Aderes Aliyah, it's a little bit deeper than that. There was something significant. There was a shift that took place at the time of Makas Bechoros. So I just think it's kedai to mention one oimik in this inyan. One oimik in the inyan, that even though the real Yitzias Mitzrayim happened during the day, but the aschala happened at night, and the night meaning it happened right at the time of Makas Bechoros. And that is, the Ramban very famously wrote a hakdama, very short hakdama, to Sefer Shemos, to read a few excerpts. The Ramban says, "V'nesyachet Sefer ve'elo Shemos." The purpose of Sefer Shemos is that it was set aside exclusively to discuss the Golus Harishon Hagnigzer Beferish v'Geula Mimeno. It was given to us as a description of the first Golus that Klal Yisrael had to endure, which was Nigzer Beferish, right? It was something that had been decreed by the Bris Bein Absarim. And additionally, the Gula from it. So you want to know what Sefer Shemos talks about? It talks about Golus Mitzrayim, and it talks about Geulas Mitzrayim. Says the Ramban. I'm skipping a little bit. He says, V'hinei, Hagolus, as it relates to the Golus, Einenu Nishlam. It's not something that was completed. Ad Yom Shuvam El Mekoyim Vel Mailas Avosim Yashuvu. Until they arrived back home, and they returned to the Madrega that the Avos HaKadoshim had been on. Kshiyatzim Mitzrayim, when they didn't left Mitzrayim, Aval Pisha Yatzim Beis Avodim, even though they weren't slaves anymore, but Adayin Yechashvu Goylam, they were still in Golus. Ki Hayu Be'eretz Leilahem, right? They were in the Midbar. That's an Eretz Leilahem. Nevuchim Ba'Midbar. They were fablungered. They were lost. They were wandering in the Midbar. Ukshabot Har Sinai. But it was only when the Yidden came to Har Sinai, Va'asu HaMishkan, and they built the Mishkan, V'shava Kadosh Baruch Hu V'hishra Shchinase B'neihem, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu returned to them. And again, he was master his Shechina with them. Az Shavu HaMailas Avoisam. That's when they returned to the Madrega of their Zaydas. Shehoya Soida Loika Al Aholeim. It's related to the Soid of that pasuk. Veheim Hema Merkava. We know that the Avos are referred to as the Merkava. They literally had the Shechina on them. Va'az, and it was only then that Nechshvu Geulim that the Yidden were considered to be properly redeemed. V'lachem, it's for that reason, says the Ramban, Nishlam HaSefer Hazeh. How does Sefer Shemos end? B'Hashlimai Inyan HaMishkan. It ends with the Mishkan. What are the last parashiyos of Sefer Shemos? Trumot, Tzavak, Yisisa, Vayakov, Pekudai. Right? What are the last words? the last words of Sefer Shemos are, B'yois k'void Hashem moli yois hatamid. The idea that the Shechina was always present in the Mishkan. What does that have to do with the story of Shemos? What does that have to do with the story of the Galus and the Geula? Because really, until the Yidden returned to the Madrega, to the Milas of the Avos of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, they were considered to be Goylim. And the Geula was not complete ad sheshavu, until they returned to Mekoimam ve'al Milas Avoisam, and to the Mile of their Zedus. The Ramban says that you want to know the story of Sefer Shemos, it's Galus Mitzrayim and Gulas Mitzrayim. From the first words of Sefer Shemos to the last words of Sefer Shemos, that's the whole narrative. That's what's going on. It's the Galus and it's the Gula. The Galus began, we know, it really began at the end of Sefer Bereshis already. Right? We chazer it over right in the beginning of Shemos to tell the whole story. But the bottom line is that it starts with the Yidden physically going to Mitzrayim. When does it end? It doesn't end when the Yidden leave Mitzrayim. It ends not even when the Yidden received the Torah. It ends when the Yidden got the Mishkan. And the K'void Hashem was Mali Yos HaTamid, and the Shechina was always present in the Mishkan. If the story of Shemos is the story of the Galus and the Geula, so you would think that it would have ended, I don't know, in a couple of parashas from now. Why is it going all the way through the narrative of the Mishkan? Says the Ramban, because the Galus of Mitzrayim wasn't just a physical Galus. The Galus of Mitzrayim was that once upon a time, there was an Avram, a Yitzchak, and a Yaakov. They were the Merkava L'Shechina. They were on this incredible lofty level. They were communicating with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ba'ifin nifla. And then what happened was, their descendants ended up in Mitzrayim. And when they ended up in Mitzrayim, not only were they subject to a physical bondage, but they lost those madregas to the point that Allah lo'ev David Zara, Allah lo'ev David Zara, to the point that they slipped into the Shar Mem test. The fact that they left Mitzrayim in Parshas B'Shalach, right? Or already in Parshas B'Ay, that in and of itself was not enough for them to be considered to where they're no longer in Galus. Because as long as the spiritual effect of being in Mitzrayim was something that was still plaguing them, well, they're still treated as being in Galus. When could we view them as being properly redeemed? It's when they are not only no longer subject to the physical torture, but now they're free spiritually as well. And that happened when they became a nation. That happened when they stood at the foot of Har Sinai and they were Makabel the Torah and they saw what the world had never seen. That happened when they became the Merkava to the Shechina like the others were, which is something that they got once they had a Mishkan. That happened when it was B'yois K'void Hashem Molei Ois HaTamid, just like it was by Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And that's why the Geula is Nishlam only after Maimed Har Sinai and Truma, Tetzava, Kisisa, Vayakov, Bekudei. And it's for that reason in the story of the Sefer HaGolus V'HaGeula Mimenu, you have not only the fact that it was Vayimaru Es Chayeyem and then they left B'chayzak Yad. In addition to that, you have Maimed Har Sinai, you have all the parashas related to the Mishkan. That, says the Ramban, is the story of Sefer Shemos. And that, says the Ramban, is a deeper understanding of Galus Mitzrayim and Gulas Mitzrayim. In other words, there were two components to Galus Mitzrayim. This is a Yesoid Musad. That is, Galus Mitzrayim was a physical Galus, but it was also a spiritual Galus. And Gulas Mitzrayim was therefore made up of two components as well. We were saved physically, and we were saved spiritually as well. I always thought that there's a checkmate raya to this Ramban. I don't even know how you can entertain a tzad not like this Ramban. Everybody knows, every little child, that you drink how many cups of wine by the Seder? 4. Right? So why do you drink 4 cups of wine? So there's actually more than one pshat, believe it or not. But the most popular pshat that all the Rishonim quote in the beginning of Arvei Pesachim is, it's Keneged the Daled L'Shonis Geula. Vaytzeisi v'hitzalti v'go'alti v'lokachti. Vaytzeisi means HaKadosh Baruch Hu said that there's going to be a Geula, I'm going to take you out of Mitzrayim. V'hitzalti v'go'alti, it's the same exact thing. What does v'lokachti mean? So if you look at the pasuk says v'lokachti eschem li la'am. Every single Rishon, Rashi, the Ramban, Ibn Ezra, the Sforna, Rashbam's, every single Rishon with no exception says, you know what it means? That I'm going to take you from me as a nation. It's referring to Maimed Har Sinai. Maimed Har Sinai. How did that make it into the Daled L'Shonos Geula? Geula means you're redeeming us from the bondage of Egypt. Which is Maimed Har Sinai. Where does that fall into this inyan of of Geula. The Geula happened as soon as the Yidden left Mitzrayim. The fact that we got the Torah, that's in the Dayenus, right? Ilu hoitziyanu mi Mitzrayim v'loy not good. That's a whole nother thing. What does that have to do with the Geula? The Teretz is the Ramban. It's muchach that way. It's muchach that the Geula was not nishlam until it was v'lokachti eschem lilam, until there was some spiritual redemption. And that's something that happened by Maimon Har Sinai, and it's for that reason v'lokachti is one of the Dal L'Shainis Geula. The truth is, a fifth lashon of Geula. That's v'hivesi eschem el aretz. Because really, the hashlama of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's relationship with us, that's something that really, really, really takes place when the Yidden enter Eretz Yisrael. That's really when it happens. And it's for that reason that Vehevesi is also one of the Lashonis of Geula. But it's clear from the fact that the fourth cup of wine is V'lokachti Eschem Lila'am, which is Maimon Har Sinai, that when we talk about Gulas Mitzrayim, we're not only focusing on the fact that we're slaves to Parai, because before V'lokachti we were already done. Parai already drowned at sea. He's not Negea anymore. He's no longer a clear and present danger, right? That's let bygones be bygones. He's in the rear view mirror. Any other cliche you can think of. He's not Negea, gone. But afilu hachi, the geula wasn't Ishlam. Because again, if the galus and the geula was only a physical galus, you drink 3 cups of wine by the Seder. You wouldn't drink 4. That fourth cup, that ferte kais that sometimes takes a little bit of serious nefesh to take down, that fourth cup is the giloi. That galus Mitzrayim was not just a physical galus, it was a spiritual galus as well. I once thought that, we know Chazal say, ben Nisan nigalu, right? The geula happened in Nisan. Now, Yitzias Mitzrayim happened in Nisan. V'lokachti eschem lila'am. Maimon Har Sinai, that didn't happen in Nisan, that happened in Sivan. How can you say B'Nisan Nigalu? Okay, it's the Aschol of the Geula, but the Ramban says that really Maimon Har Sinai, even though V'lokachti eschem lila'am, that's when the spiritual redemption was taking place, but it wasn't Nishlam until they had the Mishkan. When did Klal Yisrael get the Mishkan? Be'echad b'Nisan ukam Mishkan. It's all b'pchinis b'Nisan Nigalu, because the Hashlam of Maimon Har Sinai was the Mishkan, and that's the b'Nisan Nigalu. I'll tell you weiter. Ve'vesi eschem ela aretz asher nasasi Yisrael. When did the Yidden enter Eretz Yisrael? They entered on the 10th day of Nisan, in the times of Yeshua ben Nun. B'Nisan nigalu, the v'hitzesi, the v'hitzalti, the v'goalti. Even the lokachti al pi the Ramban and the Hakdama, and the v'hivesi, it all happened in Chodesh Nisan, because Nisan is a man of Geula, it's an Indian of B'Nisan nigalu. But the bottom line is, it's mavur, yisoid, and I don't think it's klar, there's no way to learn, even not that way, and that is that when we talk about Galus Mitzrayim, we don't just mean the physical Galus, we mean the spiritual Galus as well. By the way, one more raya, if you don't want to take my word for it, and that is, every kid knows this vart. You say by the Seder, Avodim ayunu l'par b'Mitzrayim. Vayotzenu Hashem Hashem Elokeinu misham biad chazak of zoyin etu. V'ilu loy hoitzi HaKadosh Baruch Hu es aviseinu mi Mitzrayim. Vashem wanted to take us out of Mitzrayim. Harei anu uvanenu uvnei vanenu mishubadim ayunu l'par b'Mitzrayim. And again, everyone's had this on a sheet once in his life, right? In Yiddish, English, I had them in Yiddish, but whatever. The bottom line is, everyone knows this vart that Arizal said. What do you mean? At some point, there would have been some United Nations resolution that would have said, just free the Jews, they've been slaves for 3,000 years, right? At some point, that would have happened, even, right, for Anshish Lamaini. It would have played itself out somewhere along the way. What do we mean when we say, so it's regarding this that Arizal said, because the Yidden and Mitzrayim were in the Shar Mem Tes of Tumah, and had the Yidden not left the second they left, they would have slipped into the Shar Nun, and there would have been no hope. Meaning, we could have gotten out of Mitzrayim, but we still would have been Mishubadim Lepari in a spiritual sense, Pashat. Because Golas Mitzrayim was made up of 2 components. Not enough that you get out physically. If you don't get out spiritually, then we're still Avodim Lepari B'Mitzrayim. That's exactly what we're saying. So right in the onset, Avodim Yunu Lepari B'Mitzrayim, that Rizal's famous vart is telling you that Golas Mitzrayim, Achieving Mitzrayim wasn't just a physical Golas. It was a spiritual Golas as well. If that's the case, Yesh Shloimer Adavar Pashat. The Gemara says in Masechtas Brachas Daf Tes, right? In the last Rebbe it was a Vilna Gaon, but then we realized it's really Mefurish Gemara. And the Gemara says that Yitzias Mitzrayim happened in 2 phases. On the one hand, it says Yacha Hashem Lekechem Mi Mitzrayim Loyla. The other hand, it says Mi Machras HaPesach Yatz B'nei Yisrael B'Yad Rama. Ela Melamich Eschil Lam Gula Mi Ba'erev. The Aschalta de Geula happened in the evening, and the actual Geula took place in the day. Rashi says, what does that mean? In Erev, there was an aschal to the Geula in that Pari gave the Yidden Rishus to leave Mitzrayim. They didn't physically leave. They didn't physically leave until the next day. But we said it sounds like there's like an oimik over here. There's an oimik that Makas B'chayris in and of itself was some level of gula. We have so many rayas to this. The Gedolei Achronim, the Vilna Gaon says it very much. It sounds like there's a little bit more. What's that little more? But it could be it's so pashut. And that is, what happened by Makas B'chayris? Again, just read Chumash. What happened? Kaddish li kol b'char. Right, that's what happened. What happened by Makas B'chayris was, Vayihi ki hiksha Parei l'shalchenu vayarig Hashem kol b'char be'eretz Mitzrayim al Kenan izayveach. What happened was the b'char got kedusha. He got a real kedusha. Why did he get kedusha? Because Hakadosh Baruch Hu hit the b'char Mitzrayim and he didn't hit the b'char Yisrael. At the moment of Makas B'chayris, all the b'char Yisrael got kedusha. Right? All the b'char Yisrael. But I want to tell you a nifla digah hisaf. I'm going to end with this, and that is Rashi says, and this is in Sefer Yeshaya. It's in Perik Mem Gimel Pasuk Gimel. The pasuk says, "Ki ani Hashem Kadosh Yisrael Moshiach Nosati Kofrecha Mitzrayim Kush Usfa Tachtecha." Says Rashi, Shebechayrei Mesu, because when the Yidden were Mitzrayim, the Bechayr Mitzrayim died. Va'ata b'ni Bechayri Nitzalta. You Klal Yisrael, who's b'ni Bechayri Yisrael, you were the ones that were saved. When we talk about how HaKadosh Baruch Hu was Mekadosh the Bechar by Makas B'chayris, it's not just the firstborn males. It was B'ni B'chayri Nitzalti. Remember the first time Parei and Moshe had this encounter? Moshe said, just get ready, you're going to see. You chap it with my B'char, B'ni B'chayri Yisrael. One day, when this is all said and done, we're going to chap it with your B'char as well, right? That was what he told him. It's going to be a midah keneged midah. Rashi invokes that midah keneged midah right here in Sefer Yeshaya. He says that the b'chayreim were meisu v'ata b'ni b'chayre nitzalta. It wasn't just the b'chayre Yisrael that got kedusha. Every single yid got kedusha. If you're still not convinced, this is a medrash. It's called Mishnas Rebbe Eliezer. It's Perik Yotes. Reb Shimon Omer. Totally Reb Shimon Bar said, Ein pachas misheish me'os elef b'chayros shemeisu ba'is halayla. You want to know how many b'chayrim Mitzrayim died on that night? It was 600,000. You know how I know that? Shenema, because it says, V'nosati kafrecha Mitzrayim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says that I killed your b'char and I took for me my b'char. V'hakoifer echat muras echad. Koifer is always one for one. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu was mekadesh 600,000 b'charis, that means 600,000 b'charim Mitzrayim must have died. Reb Shimon said it's back of the envelope arithmetic. The oimik of Kaddish li kol b'char, reading a Rashi and a Medrash, was not just the B'chari Yisrael. Of course, in halacha, the way we make the zecher is through the B'chari Yisrael. But really, every single yid got kedusha. At that moment, every single yid on some level became Kaddish li. Right? Kili, the Bechar belongs to me. What does Rashi say? Kili, that the Bechar belongs to me. La'atzmi kinisem. They belong to me. Al Yadeshi Kesi Bechar Mitzrayim. Lihu, they're literally mine. In the spiritual geula, the hashlam of it took place when it was V'lakachti Eschem Lilam, when the Yidden stood at Har Sinai. Well, the Ramban adds to that, it was Truma Tesavik Yisrael Ayakab Bekude, when Klal Yisrael were Chazul Mailas Avosim, and all of a sudden we became the Merkava to the Shechina. But what was the haschala of when we became HaKadosh Baruch Hu's? What was the haschala of Lokachti Eschem Li? I think it's Pashet. The haschala was Kadesh Li Kol B'char. The haschala was Lihu. That's when it started. Remember the Megala Mukis about Li, the relationship that we have with HaKadosh Baruch Hu of Li, that special Hareat Mukudeshes Li. The Lamed is the biggest of the Oisis. Meram is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Yud is the Cotton Shabi Oisis. That's Meram is Klal Yisrael. Right? That's why you always find this Ve'yisim Li Segula. That relationship that we have with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the fact that we're Konut HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is always symbolic in the Li. V'lakachti eschem li la'am. That's when it's fully manifest. That's the hashlam of the Geula. But what's the aschal to the Geula? The aschal to the Geula is Kadesh li kol b'char. Geulas Mitzrayim happened in two phases. There was a chelik of it that happened by Laila, and there was a chelik of it that happened by Yom. That's a mefurish Gemara. It's a hakol moedim that it started at night and it ended in the morning. What does it mean? It started at night, it ended in the morning. I think on the physical level, it's what Rashi is saying in Parashas in Masechtas Brachos Daf Tes Amud Aleph. Pari gave Reshus Balayla, and the Yidden physically left by Yom. On a spiritual level, what does it mean? It means something else. It means the kedusha of the Yid, the spiritual redemption. That was something that started at night. But physically, when did the Yidden leave? Physically, the Yidden got their ultimate Yeshua and the ultimate Geula and the ultimate redemption from that Tumah, that they got that they got by Maimon Har Sinai, which became fully manifest, says the Ramban, when they had the Mishkan. The aschalta of the Geula, both of the physical Geula and of the spiritual Geula, happened balayla. It was the hashlama for the physical that happened the next day. That's when they left. And as it relates to the hashlama of the spiritual, that happened when it was v'lokachti eschem lilam. This is the oimik of Makas Becheres being a geula. There was a geula that took place with Makas Becheres. Where was the geula? We're still slaves. Rashi says because Pari started running and he started giving rishus. That's on the physical level. But even that leaves us wanting a little bit more because it's not the Makas Becheres that's the geula. It was like a result of the Makas Becheres. It's still like the V'achri chen yetzu b'chush gadol. It's something that happened afterwards. The Makas Becheres did two things. It killed the Bechere Yisrael, and at the same time, it took us as being HaKadosh Baruch Hu's. The fact that we became lihu to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that gave us a Kedusha. If that gave us a Kedusha, that supercharged us. On some level, it took us in an incredible way out of the blood of Mitzrayim. It's part and parcel of the Geula. That's why we always give a special shout out to Makas Becheres. Because by Makas Becheres, it's Pashit, it's Kaddish Li, all of a sudden we got Kedusha. All of a sudden we're lihu. It's an aschal to the Geula. That's why there's no zecher for Makkahs 1 through 9, but we have this incredible zeicha that we make for the 10th Makkah. It's because it was at the time of the 10th Makkah that the aschala of Gulas Mitzrayim had. Gulas Mitzrayim happened in two phases. There was the aschalta de Geula, and then there was the ultimate, the hashlam of the Geula. The aschalta de Geula happened mi ba'erev, sai on the physical sense with Pari giving rishos, sai in the spiritual sense with Klal Yisrael, the Bechirim, and not just the Bechirim, all of Klal Yisrael getting kedusha on the physical sense. So that the next day, that was the v'hitzesi, v'hitzalti v'go'alti, and what about on the spiritual sense? That was the fourth lashon of Geula. That was the v'lokachti. That was something that happened when the Yidden were makabel the Torah at Har Sinai.